What does it mean to live a Christ centered life? What does it mean to live life with Christ at the center? When you keep Christ at the center, everything else will take care of itself. The book of Colossians is all about living the Christ centered life. So, before we get into the book of Colossians, let's understand a little bit about the city of Colossus. Colossus was a very diverse city with people from lots of different backgrounds with all sorts of teaching and philosophies. There was a mixture of Jews and Greeks and a fairly large Jewish population. The church at Colossus was most likely founded by Epaphras. He was one of Paul's fellow workers. He probably came to faith in Christ while Paul was in Ephesus. Another person who lived in Colossus was Philemon. Paul had never visited the city nor the church. You might wonder, why would Paul write a letter to a church he had never met or visited? Paul was in prison at the time, and Epaphras visited Paul in prison and brought in a report about the Colossian church. It was mostly an encouraging report, but he also shared with Paul about the false teaching that was beginning to infiltrate the church. And so Paul writes to correct the false teaching and to help Colossian church to stand firm in Christ. The first part of the letter focuses on the person and work of Christ. Chapter 1 presents Christ as the creator and sustainer of this world. Colossians 1:15 to 17. As the head of the church, chapter 1:18 and 19. And as a reconciler of all things, chapter 1:20 to 23. And then the chapter 2 presents Christ as the source of all wisdom and knowledge. Chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. As fully human and fully divine. Chapter 2, verse 9. As a deliverer from sin and evil. Chapter 2, verses 13 to 15. And as a fulfillment of the Jewish law. 2:16 to 23. Chapters 3 and 4 focus on the new life of the believer. Chapter 3 talks about your new relationship with Christ as a believer, 3 verse 1. Your new desires, chapter 3 verses 2 to 4. And your new practices, chapter 3 verses 5 to 10. Your new relationship with other believers, chapter 3 11 to 17. And your new relationship at home, chapter 3 18. And then 4 to 1. Chapter 4, 1. This theme continues in chapter 4 with your new mission in the world as a believer. Chapter 4, verses 2 to 6. My prayer and my desire is that we study this letter together and that you and I will be encouraged and strengthened to live a Christ-centered life, and we may know the joy of living with Christ at the center. As we study, we can evaluate ourselves on the basis of these questions. What is central in my life? What comes first? What has priority? What does everything revolve around me? God calls us as believers to the Christ-centered life where Christ comes first and everything else in our lives to revolve around Him. Jesus Christ is central to the world. He's central to the church. He's central to history, and He should be central in our lives. Is He really central in our lives? In the coming days, as we study the book of Colossians, let's examine ourselves and be blessed.